It's my pleasure to introduce Desmond Meade. And many of you know Desmond because I'm proud to say that Desmond was, before the pandemic, the recipient of our Thomas Paine Award. And as I told Desmond when we were chatting a little bit before the meeting started, the night that he received that award, we had a really nationwide speaker. And that speaker gave his talk, and then Desmond gave his talk. And the feedback that I had after that event was Desmond's talk was so much better than this high-class retired colonel from the Army. So Desmond really is an amazing person that we admire. And that's why, of course, we gave him the Tom Paine Award. But Desmond is a formerly homeless man, if you can believe it. He served his time in prison, and he overcame many obstacles to eventually become the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. He's chair of the Floridians for a Fair Democracy and a graduate of the Florida International University College of Law. He's a Ford Global Fellow and a 2021 MacArthur Genius Fellow. He's been recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world for 2019. He leads efforts to empower and civically re-engage local communities across the state. And that's what we try to do too. So that's why we're so happy to have Desmond speaking for us. He's been named the Floridian of the Year and the Central Florida Floridian of the Year. As president and executive director of the FRRC, he works on voting and criminal justice reform issues. He led FRRC to a historic victory in 2018 with the successful passage of Amendment 4, a grassroots citizen initiative which restored voting rights to over 1.4 million Floridians with past felony convictions. Now just think about that. And for those of you that don't know, restricting the right to vote was a technique used during the Jim Crow era to keep black people from voting. And a lot of black people were convicted of felonies, which were trumped up charges, so they couldn't vote. And I mean, it's anti-democratic, so we tried to correct that with the amendment, and we can thank Desmond for bringing that to fruition in Florida. Desmond has appeared many times on TV and radio, and I'm not going to go through all the places that he's appeared, but believe me, it's a long list. He's spoken before national organizations such as the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He's testified before congressional members and staffers, and was part of a delegation to the United Nations where he gave testimony regarding disenfranchisement in Florida. Now think about that, folks, how bad that is that we have to have a representative from Florida to go to the United Nations and tell them how bad voting has been suppressed in the state of Florida. That's not something that we can be proud of. Desmond orchestrated a historic meeting at the White House between returning citizens and President Obama's administration. He is a guest columnist for Huffington Post, and one of his articles about the death of Trayvon Martin gathered national attention. Desmond is a game changer as recognized by Politic 365. Desmond is married and has 5 children, and we're proud to count him as an ally in our struggle to keep Florida democratic. And I mean democratic not in the sense of party politics, but in the sense of maintaining our democracy. There's a big difference. Thank you very much. Desmond, you have the floor.
Gene, thank you so much for the introduction. First of all, let me just say it is definitely an honor to hang out with you guys, of course, for Florida veterans. I like the last 2 words, right? Common sense, right? Because that's all we want is some common sense from our politicians. But no, it's definitely an honor to be here again. And I'm sad to hear about that keynote speaker, especially the part that really hurts me. As an Army veteran, I wish it was like a retired colonel for the Marine Corps or some other high ranking, maybe Navy official or something, but not an Army guy. I mean, come on, we supposed to deliver, you know? But nevertheless, that did put a lot of pressure on me, though, Gene. All right. So let me start here. Because we started our meeting with folks placing their hand over their heart and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And I don't know, I can't speak for everybody else, but I know that whenever I go through that ritual, it's very touching for me. And over the last several years, it really became extremely special for me. And why? Because, as I'm there and standing or placing my hand over my heart and I'm saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag, right, of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, indivisible. And then I think probably the most important 6 words of the entire pledge is with liberty and justice for all, not for some, but for all. And I think that, when Gene talks about creating a better democratic society, it is a society that believes in liberty and justice for all. Unfortunately, we live in a state where our leadership have totally disregarded those last 6 words. I know this because we see it play out every single day, and it's been playing out for quite some time. For those of you all who don't know me, I like to tell people I'm just an ordinary guy that was just fortunate enough to be in a position at a certain time during extraordinary moments and was allowed to do extraordinary things. You know, in 2005, I was homeless, addicted to drugs, recently released from prison, unemployed, and standing in front of railroad tracks, waiting on a train to come so I can jump in front of it. I didn't have any hope for my life. I didn't have any self esteem. I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was ready to end my life. And I stood there for quite some time waiting on the train to come, but it never came. And I crossed those tracks and I ended up checking myself into drug treatment. And after completing the treatment program, I moved into a homeless shelter. And it was while I was there that I made a decision that I needed to do something to prevent me from ending up at those railroad tracks again. And so the only thing I could think about was to get an education. And maybe that would be helpful. And I did. And I enrolled in a local college in Dade County, Miami-Dade Community College. And after successfully getting an associate's degree in paralegal studies, I was encouraged to continue my education, and I did. And I got a bachelor's degree in public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice. And in both of those instances, I graduated with highest honors. And because of the work that I did, I was actually able to finally get accepted into law school. And in May of 2014, I graduated from Florida International University College of Law with a Juris Doctorate degree. For those of y'all clapping, thank you so much. For those of y'all who are not clapping, wait till I tell you all some more news. Maybe you'll clap then, right? but you know, but I'm a returning citizen, which means that I've had a previous felony conviction. And because of my situation and because of what I was seeing, especially as I was in my undergraduate studies around public safety management with the concentration in criminal justice, did a lot of research, did a lot of theses papers, for my courses. And what I consistently seen was throughout the state of Florida, there was over 1.5 million people, right? People from all walks of life, all political persuasions, who was shut out of so many things. They faced collateral consequences because of a felony conviction. the biggest thing was that they couldn't vote, and Florida had a lifetime ban, right, which barred them from voting. But then there was other collateral consequences because of the loss of civil rights, that they could not own or rent a home in certain areas. They could not get occupational licenses. They couldn't serve on a jury. They couldn't run for office. And you're talking about, I tell you, the one story that really hit me like square between the eyes was of a gentleman named Howie. He was a retired military guy. He fought in the Gulf Wars, and he came back home with PTSD. He came back home not getting the full brunt of support that he should have got from the Veterans Administration, and he fell on hard times. And one day, he was hungry, and he did grocery shopping, and he bounced a check. And because he bounced the check, Gene, Howie was barred from ever being able to participate in elections. And it took him over 30 years before we were finally able to get his rights restored. Now, that hit me square between the eyes because I've seen this guy who willfully said, you know what, I'm going to put my life on the line to fight for this country. I'm going to put everything I love on the line, right, to defend democracy. And because he bounced a check, the state of Florida said, you're not even good enough to vote. You're not even good enough to have a say on what's going on in your community. You're not good enough to serve on a jury. You're not good enough to live where some of us can live. And it was just something inherently wrong with that. And so I was motivated to actually start the effort to launch a citizens initiative to restore voting rights. And of course, in 2018, we were very successful. 1.4 million people, right, now had access to democracy because of the efforts of so many folks, even some folks on this call. That's why I was so excited to hear the young lady from the League of Women Voters talking about petitions. Man, that took me back. They gave me flashbacks. I remember having to go around the state of Florida collecting over 1 million petitions to get this amendment on the ballot. And when folks got a chance to vote for it, over 5 million people voted yes on Amendment 4. And there were people from all political persuasions, from all walks of life, that just knew it was something that was just honorable. It was something that was value based. I mean, that, guess what? Everyone deserved a second chance, no matter if they want to register as a Republican or register as a Democrat. Every American citizen deserves an opportunity to have their voices heard. And that's what we fought for. That's what we were able to successfully win in 2018. But of course, you know, whenever you have politicians involved, things can get a little messy, right? Just like the young lady said, can you believe that we have to actually have a petition to run a constitutional amendment just to say that folks should be afforded safe and clean drinking water? But that is what the state of affairs in this country and in this state has come to because of the political back and forth that does nothing but divide our country, that does nothing but cause regular people to suffer while politicians are engaged in this gamesmanship. There's no way that anyone should have to even collect petitions so a human being could have access to clean drinking water. But that's where we're at. And when politicians got involved after we passed Amendment 4, and let me just say this, you know, I tell folks that one of the most special things about passing Amendment 4 was the fact that we got people from all walks of life to support it, and that we did not, in our campaign, at no time did we attack anybody. We didn't use scare tactics. When those 5.1 million people came, they were not motivated by hatred. They were not motivated by fear, right? But rather they were motivated by love, forgiveness, and redemption. And we showed the world that love can in fact win the day, right? And it was a beautiful thing, right? But once we passed, politicians decided that they wanted to what? Enact some type of implementation law, which now created a whole bunch of drama and a whole bunch of confusion. And so now, rather than people instantly being able to be able to register to vote and participate in democracy, legislation was passed that says that before they can do that, they must first pay all of their outstanding legal financial obligations, which in a lot of people's interpretation turns out to be what they call the poll tax. We heard Gene talk about that when we seen the resurgence of felon disenfranchisement, its specific goal was to diminish the political capital of newly freed slaves. And that was during the Jim Crow era. And felon disenfranchisement was one of many tactics that was implemented. The other one was that people have to pay if they want to be able to vote, right? And what we knew was that if you were a slave and was released, where are you gonna get the money? We're faced with the same dilemma. When you have billions of dollars that's being owed, when you have people, when they went through the court systems, were assessed various fines and fees and court costs and restitution, where are they going to get the money? Most of these folks were too poor to even pay that. And how do we know this? Because over the past 20 years, we know that the courts have no expectations of receiving any more than 10% of the fines and fees they assess because people are just too poor to pay it. And so to require that people pay something that they can't afford to pay in order to be able to vote was erecting a roadblock and was denying people the dream that Amendment 4 promised. And so we as an organization, and I am the executive director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, we rolled up our sleeves and we went to work. And I remember one year we raised over $30 million, and we went across the state of Florida, and we was helping people who was too poor to pay their legal financial obligations. We paid out close to $30 million of people fines and fees so they can have an opportunity, because we believe that no American citizen should be forced to choose between putting food on their table or voting. They shouldn't be forced to choose between paying their rent or mortgage or their light bill or voting. That voting should be free and accessible to every American citizen. And so we thought we had just one fight to deal with, and so we're working hard to help people pay off fines and fees. And then, lo and behold, the state of Florida last year started arresting people. Every single person that the state of Florida arrested, the state of Florida accused them of registering illegally and voting illegally, saying that these people should never have been able to register to vote because they did not qualify under Amendment 4, either because they owed fines and fees or either because Amendment 4 did not extend to people who were convicted of felony sexual offenses or people who were convicted of murder. And so the state of Florida is saying because these individuals either owed money or these individuals were convicted of the disqualifying offenses, that they registered illegally and voted illegally. The problem that I have is that every single one of those individuals were issued a voter identification card by, guess who? Not by FRRC or not by Florida Veterans for Common Sense. No, there was issued a voter identification card by the state of Florida. You see, this process is very simple. Organizations like ours or the League of Women Voters and other third-party voter registration organizations, they go out into the community encouraging people to participate in our democracy. And those who are not registered, we have them fill out a voter registration form. That we need you to be a part of democracy. And then we take that voter registration form and we send it to the state and say, hey, state, this person wants to be a part of democracy. Now it's your job, state, to determine whether or not they qualify to be a voter. And the state is supposed to do its job. And if they make a determination that this person is not qualified, then it's very simple. They don't issue them a voter identification card. But if they decided that this person is qualified, then they would send them a voter identification card in the mail. That's what the state did. And so the big issue is that if these people should have never been able to vote, then why did the state issue them a voter identification card, giving them the belief and assumption that these people that they were eligible to vote? I could never, my heart hurt of a case in Gainesville where the supervisor of elections went into the jail and told people that they can vote. One guy was like, "Are you sure? I don't think I can vote." And the supervisor of elections said, "Well, give me your name and I will check. And if you can vote, I will send you a pamphlet letting you know you can vote." And sure enough, a couple weeks later, he got the pamphlet. What did he believe? He can vote. And he talked about how he felt so liberated because for so many years, as a person who have been, in substance abuse or as a person with a felony, he felt like he wasn't a part of society anymore. But once he was told that he was eligible to vote, it gave him hope, right? It gave him some self-esteem, and he felt so great that he could now be a part of something bigger than himself. And so he registered. But 2 years later, he gets arrested by the state of Florida. And so we were very incensed, right? Because we believe that, especially if you're talking about voter integrity, right? That it starts and stops with the state, not with the individual. It starts with the state. Because if there's a broken system, the state response to a broken system should be to fix it, not to arrest American citizens who naturally believe that they could vote. And so we started raising the ruckus, you know, and we eventually, a few weeks ago, we filed a lawsuit in the state of Florida in federal courts against the entire state of Florida. And when I'm talking about the entire state of Florida, I'm talking about from the governor on down, all supervisors of elections, all clerk of courts, Department of Correction, the governor, the secretary of state. We have about 200 people that we have to serve, but we felt that it was important for us to stand up because at the end of the day, a state should not be engaging in practices that discourages democratic participation. It's just something that is unpatriotic about that, right? That states should be doing things to encourage people to vote and not discourage them by arresting them. In one particular case, you had the state raided someone's home in the middle of the night with the SWAT team and helicopters overhead as if they were Pablo Escobar. And all that person did was participate in democracy. Why would you have such a show of force against someone that all they did was innocently participate in democracy? And so we are committed to fighting back. We are committed to ensuring that every one of the 1.4 million people who should be benefiting from Amendment 4 get that opportunity. But in the process of doing that, we still understand that there's still millions of people who are not barred from voting, who do not have the challenges of Amendment 4, who can be registered but are not. And we want to be able to engage and encourage people, citizens, who rightfully should be registered to vote, but just choose not to be a part of our democracy. When we talk about the state of our affairs, part of the responsibility have to rely on the fact that we have a high level of voter apathy and we need to show up in greater force. We need to get more of our friends and neighbors that's coming out to vote and making their voices heard and holding a lot of these elected officials accountable, right? And there's just so many opportunities for people to do so. And we figure as people who have lost the right to vote and fought long and hard to gain it back, that we're the best emissaries to talk to people about
Sure.
why they should be participating in our democracy. And let me tell you something, Gene. You didn't say it, and I'm glad we probably didn't have it in the bio. But because of our efforts, Gene, guess what? February of this year, we were nominated. Florida Rights Restoration Coalition was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for 2023. And we were nominated by the same organization who nominated Donald Trump Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so we're honored with this nomination. Whether or not we win, it remains to be seen. But just like the Oscars or the Grammys, a nomination is still good enough, right? And and we were recognized because our efforts were done in a way that did not exasperate the division that our country is experiencing now, but rather in a way that promotes healing and us coming together. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to disagree on one thing or another, but what we can all agree on, right, is each other's humanity, right? We can all agree on multiple things, multiple values that we all share. We can agree on that. And we can agree that we would much rather live in a community, in a state, in a country, right, to where there is more love than hate. We can all agree on that, right? And so I am looking forward to continuing this work, and I'm looking forward to the type of support that we get from Florida Veterans for Common Sense and the League of Women Voters and other entities that's probably represented in the audience today. That we continue to fight, but really understand for us, we want to fight in a way that is not partisan. We want to fight in a way that unifies folks that may agree with us or may disagree with us. But we do recognize the fact that as an American citizen, you should have a right to have your voice heard, and you should have some type of what's that word, obligation to participate, right, in our democracy. We need you, and we need more of you. So thank you so much for this opportunity, Gene. And I am ready for questions.
Well, Desmond, I will say this. Once again, you made a first class talk, and I want to commend you. One of the reasons it's so good is because you're speaking from the heart. There's nothing artificial about what you're saying to us, and it's very appreciated because your heart's reaching to our hearts. And it's just upsetting to us to just imagine, like you said, that somebody is denied the right to vote. I can imagine the psychological impact that that must have on somebody. I mean, if anybody can empathize with that, I mean, that makes you feel like you're worth nothing
Yeah.
if you can't participate with your own community. So, once again, Desmond, you hit that hole in one, buddy.
Thank you so much,
So,
Gene.
I have a question for you before we go to the other questions. And I just wonder, because DeSantis is doing things, arresting people for voting when they have their voter registration card. He just fired a state attorney because he doesn't like her policies or he doesn't like the way she's doing her job, not because she's dishonest or that she's broken the law or that she's doing anything that's contrary to what you would expect a state attorney to do, but what he doesn't like. And he's doing these things under color of law. And it seems to me that there may be some personal liability for that. Are any lawyers considering that to slap that sucker with a personal lawsuit and get some money from him? I mean, it's not right what he's doing.
Well, I can tell you this much. I think that there's a bunch of lawyers already lining up, probably tripping over themselves to sue the governor. Um, it would be very hard to sue him in any other capacity than in his official capacity, right? And not as an individual. And so, if there's any damages to be gained, it'll probably come at the hands of taxpayers' dollars, right? Definitely taxpayers' dollars is going to be paying for his defense of these lawsuits because we don't have an attorney general that would hold him accountable, right, for his actions. Um, and that's the scary part. The scary part right now that we're facing in Florida is the level of influence that the governor has over all the branches of government, whether it's the legislative or the judicial, right? And we was raised, and I could say this: we was raised to believe that there was a separation of powers and there was this balance, checks and balances. That sometimes one of the branches might not do things the way they're supposed to be done, but you had two other branches. One out of the two branches will be able to check that, um, and right or wrong. But when you have, you know, a legislature that would only, I mean, every basically whatever legislation was passed was the one that he wanted. And so basically you had legislatures that were elected by the people, but they weren't serving the people, they were serving the governor because of his presidential aspirations. And some of these legislatures are hoping for appointments, you know, and no one wants to anger the government. And then you have a judicial branch that, you know, in the higher courts that, you know, you had several of them that was appointed by the governor. And then because of him uh exercising his power as a governor, and in the eyes of so many people, kind of crossing some boundaries there, right? um, because I mean, you said it right. You know, the last state attorney that he relieved didn't break any laws, and typically what happens is that when a governor removes an official, elected official from office, it's a result of that official breaking a law or being accused of breaking a law or being convicted of breaking the law, right? Or engaging in unethical behavior, right? And so that's what we've seen in the past. In this particular case, what we're seeing is because, oh, I just don't like your policies, you know, and so that's kind of stretching the boundaries a little bit. And so when you see someone doing that, now you're having elected officials, you have the courts. Right now, there are judges that before they rule on things, they're considering whether or not it's going to piss the governor off, right? And that is scary because that means that these boundaries that our forefathers had set up to separate the powers have eroded.
That's correct.
And that should be scary for everyone, right? Because even if people did not agree with the state attorney and their policies, the ability for a governor just to remove somebody that easily means that you may have an attorney, a state attorney who you believe is doing the right thing, but then the next person who becomes governor could remove them. And how would that feel? And so I think that when we make decisions and when we are considering, you know, folks, especially now during elections, the the reality is that we cannot only base our decision on what we think will be best for our side. We need to base our decision on what will be best for the people, what would
That's
be
right.
best for our community,
That's
right?
right.
And because once you get into the tribalism, then a lot of what your last two words are, common sense, goes out the window, right?
True.
Because anybody with common sense would be like, wait a minute, that's overreaching. That's wrong. Whether that person is a Democrat or a Republican, whether that person is having policies that I agree with or not, it is wrong to remove somebody from office that the people elected without that person not doing anything egregious, right? So that's
But
a total disrespect to the will of the voters. But guess what? As a person who led Amendment 4, I understand what that feels like, right? Because I've seen politicians totally disregard the will of the voters on Amendment 4, right? And so we have to, I think that we do have to be concerned, whether, like I said, it doesn't matter what political party we are. Um, whether or not we agree or know about this person's policies, we have to be concerned about the overreach of the executive branch into the legislative branch, into the judicial branch, and then into really the will of the people. Just totally disregarding the will of the people. That should be scary for everyone because he's not going to be the governor all the time. And what happens? What is going to stop the next governor from doing that and might do something that you don't like?
you're exactly right, Desmond, because what it does is set a terrible precedent. And
Yes.
DeSantis knows that a federal judge has already ruled that what he did with the first state attorney that he fired was unconstitutional. He knows it's
Yeah.
unconstitutional, but he doesn't respect that. Okay, we'll go to the next question and see what we've got here. Uh, Steve and Martin says, why would Desmond accept a pardon giving him the right to vote while in this state tens of thousands are denied this right? Desmond, for some reason, your audio just went off. I'm going to try to see if I can get it back on.
No, it's me. It's me.
Okay.
You got so excited with the question. Could you read the question one more time? Please do not leave out one word of that question.
Okay, let me see if I can.
Why would Desmond?
Why would Desmond accept a pardon giving him the right to vote while in this state tens of thousands are denied this right?
Wow. So guess what? Desmond did not accept the pardon to get the right to vote back. Desmond got the right.
I don't know where that question came from, but
Desmond got the right to vote back with everyone else when Amendment 4 passed. That's when Desmond got the right to vote back. But let me back up, because under the Charlie Crist administration, let me tell you, I had ample opportunity, right? I had ample opportunity to get clemency, right? But for me to get clemency, I had to walk away from the fight. And at first, my wife was mad, but then she understood. And let me tell you, because at the time, our attorney, matter of fact, it was during Charlie Crist administration as well as during Rick Scott administration. During the Rick Scott administration, Pam Bondi was the attorney general, right? McCullum was the attorney general during Charlie Crist administration, and I had good relationships with both of those attorney generals. And there was opportunity for me to actually have my rights restored, but I refused to do it. And this is what I told my wife. Yeah, I could get fast track, right? But what about the other millions that can't vote? I want my right to vote back when I can get everybody else's right to vote back. And that's why I had to wait until 2018 when we passed Amendment 4. And then in January of 2019, I walked across the door threshold like everyone else to register to vote for the first time, right? In a long time. To register to vote, and I voted in my very first presidential election in 2020. Right.
Desmond, this is one more reason why we admire you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a personal story, and that's an important story, and thank you for that.
And then afterwards is when I applied for a pardon by the governor, and of course he denied me twice. But he eventually restored my civil rights, right? Because Amendment 4 just restored the right to vote, and he restored my civil rights, but he wouldn't give me a pardon. And it's it is what it is. I could use that, but I don't need it. But I thought it would have been a great symbol, a great story. I mean, let me tell you, how many people do you know in the state of Florida, right? That was Time Magazine 100, one of the 100 most influential in the world in Time Magazine, right? Floridian of the Year, a MacArthur Genius Fellow, right? And now a Nobel Peace Prize nominee. How many Floridians you know that have all of those accolades?
None
right?
other.
And you would think that at some point along the line, the governor would at least send a letter saying, you know what? Congratulations on your accomplishments. Right?
I think
and
so.
that's what the pardon was supposed to be. For me, is a message to everyone else that, man, listen, yeah, we make mistakes, right? We could be down and out, but man, if we can just stick to certain things, that we can overcome those mistakes and we could do amazing things. That's the story of my life. And it's not just to make Desmond feel good, but it's let everyone out there, that folks on this call, I promise you, have a family member or a friend who is an alcoholic or a drug addict, who have been arrested or been in jail or been homeless, right? And think that they could only do so much because of their mistakes. But I live my life to be an example that we can overcome the impossible and become contributing members of society in a very powerful way, right? Following certain steps. And so my application for pardon was just a part of that story, right? To be a source of inspiration to others. But at the end of the day, I mean, listen, I got the right to vote back. Listen, have a good job. I have a beautiful wife and family, right? I mean, I'm good. But I think the pardon, right, is a nice exclamation mark on the work that I've done. And so I have no qualms and no regrets whatsoever applying for a pardon, right? But just know, let's set the record straight. My rights to vote was not restored until we passed Amendment 4. And I was committed to that.
Well, thank you very much, Desmond. And I'll tell you this, be optimistic, because in 3 years, we're going to have a new regime and you're going to get your pardon.
All right, let's keep our fingers crossed.
Okay, let's go to the next one. Bruce Weinstein asks, I understand that in a lot of cases, the states can't tell people how much they owe in fees. So how can they pay? Can't we get the state to get their act together?
Yep. Guess what? Great question. That's exactly why we filed the lawsuit. Because what we're saying, and basically what we're doing is going to a judge and saying, hey, Your Honor, the state is not doing its job, right? They have a broken system that they refuse to fix, right? And it's not nothing new. They knew the system was broken back when the Bush Gore elections, and God knows how many years that's been, right? But they still have refused to fix the system, even around fines and fees. You know, you pass the law says people can't vote until they pay off their legal financial obligations, but then you can't even tell them how much they owe. And so it's a catch 22.
Yes, it
And
is.
the state told the courts that they had a system that they can do it. And so we back to the courts and said, hey, I don't know what the state told you in the last lawsuit, but we're here today telling you that the state have not owned up to its responsibility. They have a broken system. They're not doing their job. And we the people, want you, the judge, to force the state to do its damn job. That's our lawsuit right there.
That's a good lawsuit, because I just suspect that there's a reason that they don't want to solve that problem. They want to keep people uncertain so they don't vote.
Yep. And guess what? The first two people that actually felt the brunt of what the state actions were, believe it or not, Gene, you ready? The first two people that felt the force of that were people who were registered Republicans.
Oh, I can believe it.
Yep.
That's
And so the thing about it is that what the state of Florida is doing is giving us an amazing opportunity to talk about a democracy in a more wholesome way, as opposed to it being, oh, we're just talking about it because we want our side to win.
we have another question from Dale Anderson. Thank you for the presentation. Is Governor DeSantis' election police force purpose primarily to intimidate voters, or are they empowered to review election results and make determinations?
Wow, that's a good question. Uh, I can, and that's a question that I cannot answer, right? But what I can say is that their actions. So first of all, that office is in shambles. They haven't filled out their positions yet, and the first act that they did was start arresting folks. And the funny thing about it is, and this is where I say that, we need to start thinking about things from a more neutral perspective. You know, they started arresting people weeks before a primary election, right? And they should have known that if they waited so close to an election, that it would have a chilling impact on voters. One of the issues that we have with the state of Florida is that we're not seeing enough of Florida encouraging people to vote. What we're seeing more of from Florida is actions that discourage people to vote. And because of these arrests, let me tell you, there are people who were not in danger of arrest that were scared to vote because they were like, "Shoot, I don't know if I can vote anymore, and I don't want to run the risk of having officers raid my house and drag me out of the middle of the night in my pajamas for the whole world to see." And so I'd rather just stay at home and not vote. And that is just as harmful as a person who got arrested. because that's somebody who could have participated that just didn't because
That's
of the state
correct.
action.
That's correct, Desmond. And check your camera because it looks like you're frozen. I don't know what that is, but we
All
can hear
right.
you fine, but you look frozen. And I would
Wow.
like to read Steve Martin came back and you'll like this comment, Desmond. He said, I stand amended with egg on my face. DeSantis rejected the pardon. Desmond made the application in 1920, and he means 2021. Desmond remains a genuine hero. So that's a second thought.
Oh,
Desmond, now you're blacked out entirely, but
I am.
we can, yes, sir, but we can hear you just
Okay,
fine.
I can
So,
see. I can see your handsome face, Gene.
oh, not so
I
handsome,
really
but
can.
you can see an old face. Rich, how about questions from the floor? Do we have any?
I'm going to take the first one, and if anybody else has a question, I just ask that they come up to the podium and speak into the mic so the people on Zoom and Desmond can see and hear them. So Desmond, first of all, thank you for a wonderful talk. And following on to the issue of people not knowing how much they owed in fines and penalties and stuff. Once they paid, were they given any kind of sent any letter or anything that said they had paid in full and they didn't have it, there were no outstanding fines or fees that they had to pay off? Otherwise, they're in perpetual jeopardy.
Well, no, that's a great question, and it really speaks to the complexities of the issues. I think that once again we had politicians that wanted to rush to file legislation without carefully thinking this thing out, right? Because here you have a situation where you have clerk of courts, and the clerk of courts is the body of the court system that administers, helps the court function, right? And they're the ones that are supposed to be collecting fines or fees that are assessed, by the judge in certain cases. But here's the situation. What we've seen was that a lot of these clerks didn't even know what to assess because the only legal financial obligation that a person is required for in order to be able to vote are the legal financial obligations that were assessed at the time of sentencing, right? And what we've seen happen was that even after sentencing, people were getting assessed certain like cost of incarceration or other types of legal financial obligations that may develop or occur after a person was sentenced. That was not, a person does not have to pay that. But if it's all jumbled, right, then who makes those distinctions? And when you have a clerk of courts that don't understand that, right, it becomes problematic. Here's the other thing. People, when they can't afford to pay fines and fees, what happens to that legal financial obligation? The clerk of court sells that debt off to a debt collector, which can then charge up to 40% of what that person owes. You guys with me on this? Just nod your head if
We're
you're with
with
me.
you. It's
All right.
disgusting.
So here's the whole thing. The legislation clearly says that if I owe $100 and the debt collector is now charging me $140, right? That all I have to pay is the $100. The first money come out of my pocket should be towards the legal financial obligations that I was assessed at the time of sentencing. What we've seen in some cases was that money that was supposed to be paying off a fine was applied to the interest that was charged by a debt collector, right? And so there are all kinds of different nuances. What do a person owe? What legal financial obligations is applicable and which one is not applicable, and then how that money is distributed, right? And so there's so many ways that people can get it wrong, and you have folks that are feeling that, well, I paid what I was supposed to pay, I got a receipt for it, but guess what? You had some clerk of courts that their records were kept in a shoebox. In a shoebox. We're in 2023, and we have institutions that have records maintained in shoeboxes, right? And so that makes it a ripe situation for somebody to make a mistake, right? Now, am I mad at them for making a mistake? No, I'm not. But what I do say is this: no American citizen's liberty should be at jeopardy because of a mistake that an official has made. If their liberty should be at jeopardy, it should be because of something that they willfully and intentionally did, knowing that it was against the law. But if they relied on the state for assurances, if they relied on the state for information, their liberty should never be jeopardized. And let me tell you, in previous Republican administrations, from Rick Scott to Charlie Crist to Jeb Bush, I can tell you that that has never happened. That when they discovered that someone should not have been on the roll, it was an administrative action to remove them. It was never a criminal action to raid their home, put them in handcuffs, and drag them out for the world to see. So this was clearly an intimidation thing. But at the end of the day, going back to your question, Mike, is at the end of the day, we feel this. If a citizen cannot rely on the government to determine their voter eligibility, then who the hell can they rely on?
Good point.
And that is something that they're, because Governor DeSantis, his first thing was, oh, it's the third party voter registration orgs like the League of Women Voters. They're the ones that's registering these people that should not be registered. I'm like, oh no, au contraire, Mr. Governor. At the end of the day, the third party voter registration organizations don't have the information and technology that the state of Florida has. Their job is just to make sure that it's filled out right and that those forms are turned in. Their job is not to be determined out there in the field whether or not a person is eligible or not. It's impossible for them to do it. But it is not impossible for the state. That's your responsibility and the Secretary of State you appointed. Do your job. It's just that simple. Do your job.
And Rich, the next question.
We have one from Dennis Plews.
Okay.
Good evening, Counselor. I have a question as to whether your pending civil or federal action includes claims under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 against the individual named defendants.
Oh,
You have that memorized, Desmond?
Hey, so listen. I can say this, right? I am not the attorney on record on this case, so I can't answer that question, right? But what I can tell you, once again, we do have plaintiffs. We have individual plaintiffs, and then FRC as an organization is listed as an organizational plaintiff, and our claims are against from the governor on down.
If you care to know why I asked the question, that's the 1866 Civil Rights Act, and it imposes personal liability on state actors who violate individuals' rights. Plus attorney's fees and court costs.
Look like we might have to put you on the legal team.
I've been retired since 2016.
Your contact information.
Now,
That's
I'm no longer authorized to practice.
That's something for you to research, though, Desmond, because I think Dennis is very well right. That's Mr. Dennis Plews, and we're very proud of him because he gives us a lot of good advice. Next question, Rich.
Yeah, Gene, make sure you text that to me too, as well.
Yes, sir. Will do.
I get that in my lawyer's hands.
Any other questions from the audience here?
Listen, don't send a ringer up there. I don't want any attorneys coming up there dropping bombs on me. I need only non-lawyers.
Yeah.
And no one that had prior service in the Marine Corps.
We have another one up here.
Good.
Hold on.
Microphone. Thank you. Desmond, I am very interested in finding out how your grassroots movement started. From the very beginning, what did you do that was so effective?
Oh, that's a great question. You know what it was? It was let me tell you. Um I think it was just being as genuine as possible. And believe it or not, and I unknowingly started this way. I remember in 20, I want to say 2011, um, Rick Scott took office, and the first official act that the cabinet did was to roll back the clemency policies that the previous administration, which was Governor Chris, had, where people with less serious offenses were able to have their civil rights restored automatically. First thing, even though no one on the cabinet campaigned on it, the very first thing they did was roll back those policies and made it even harder, right? And I remember thinking that day, I was like, wow, with a signature on a piece of paper, you had four politicians able to determine which American citizen get to vote and which American citizen can't vote. And I thought that was way too much power in the hands of any politician, whether they're Democrat or Republican. No handful of politicians should have that much power to determine whether or not a citizen can engage in the most endearing quality of our citizenship, which is being able to vote. That is something that is sacred and should be treasured and should not be allowed to get in the arena of partisan politics, because whether it's a Democrat or Republican, partisan politics will see rear its ugly head in there. And voting is something that should be afforded to anyone, regardless of their political stance or religious stance or their race or how much money they make and all of that. And so when I thought about that, I thought about the families. At that time, it was 1.4 million people who couldn't vote. I thought about their families who could. And I thought, man, maybe we ought to get these returning citizens to just go to someone who they love and say, will you support my efforts to get my rights restored? That's all it was. Love votes, right? And if they can get 5 or 10 people to say, you know what, I love this person and I think they deserve a second chance. That was actually the foundation of my grassroots effort, right? And unknowingly, what it did is just morphed into our campaign efforts, which was we was organizing around love, not hate or fear, but love. We wanted people to go into the voting booth and think about, do I vote because of what the politician tell me to do, or do I vote because I know that the person that sits at the dinner table with me, that person that lays in bed with me at night, deserves a second chance. And they say blood is thicker than water, right? And so we figured that more people will go with the bloodline than with the water line. And that's what happened. But that's been the basis of my grassroots organizing. It was back then, it's still here today. Organize people around love, man. How do we see our neighbors? How do we find compassion? How do we, see the humanity in each other? That to me is more important than the person's politics, is their humanity.
Well, Desmond, we want to thank you. This has been a wonderful talk, and you certainly lived up to everybody's expectations. And I can tell you this, as Veterans for Common Sense, we're aligned 100% with you. And we agree that as Americans, we need to stand up for our democratic rights and protect one another and love one another and not go around threatening people. And
Yeah.
some of the things that are coming down in our country right now are just not right. They're un-American, but we can change it. And one of the
Yes, we
things that's
can.
going to happen when we make those changes, you're going to get your pardon. And we're going to be happy for that.
All
So, my
right.
friend,
Appreciate that.
thank you very much. You are the
Well, thank
best,
you all.
and we're with you, man.
Yep.
Okay,
Don't forget to send me that code.
don't worry, we will.
All right.
And with that, we adjourn the meeting, and thank you again, Desmond.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.